Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on this Wednesday, right before the holidays. Today, we're talking about financial wellness for freelance artists. I'd like to start by thanking my panelists for giving an hour of their time and whatever prep work they did for this. That's also time spent. So, thank you both so much for being here. And thank you all for attending the panel as viewers and question askers. Hopefully, we will save about probably 10 minutes at the end for questions if anyone has questions, or feel free to drop them in the chat as we proceed. And I'm Connor Cook. I'm a board member for the AWFC, but probably most of you know me by now. I recognize pretty much all your names. So great to see you all. Let us begin. Let's start with Hope. Hope, could you please introduce yourself? Give us a little background on who you are, what you do, and how you arrived on this panel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hope. I am a composer, a songwriter, producer. I have been in LA for 10 years now. I came out here for the UCLA film scoring program and have stuck around ever since. Um, I've worked for a composer for about 4 years named Alex Garingas, who scored a lot of animation. So I did a lot of additional music for that. I'm now a co-writer with him as a songwriter and fully on my own, doing my own thing, scoring a series for Mattel, writing a lot of songs for animation. And yeah, I arrived on this panel. I was just speaking before, like I have reached out to Connor in the past, just having casual conversations about my passion for financial wellness as a freelancer. I'm married to a freelancer. We have a kid. There's a lot of moving parts. I don't come from familial wealth, and it's just something that I've been passionate about to help others navigate that because not everybody who is a composer is an entrepreneur and or somebody who cares about their finances or has that kind of brain. And I think it's so vital to your longevity in this industry, especially in the current state of like constant flux the last few years. And so it's been something just like wanting to share and impart any wisdom I've learned from being like an insane budgeter and somebody who likes to really plan ahead and be very organized in my finances and have seen like a lot of fruit from that labor. And just wanting to share that with people who are also in this and maybe are not in that kind of mind.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you for reaching out whenever that was, long time ago. And thank you for being here, giving knowledge to people because I think it's so hard. I am not financially minded, which is why I am selfishly very excited for this one because I'm like a true artist. I'm like, money, why must I need that? What is it? Really, what is it? Is it conceptual? It's actually, it is something you can hold. So anyway, this is a good topic, I think, for all of us, especially those of us who try really hard at finances but still don't quite get it, which is me. So Jonathan, could you please introduce yourself to kind of the
Yeah.
same spiel?
Yeah, my name is Jonathan Miller. I've been a composer in LA since, oddly enough, 2001, something like that, 23 years in LA. I moved here from Ohio. I do come from very modest background, financially. I volunteered when Connor put this on Facebook because it's been an issue that I've been talking with a lot of friends for a long time. I get asked questions about financial things all the time of people around me. And actually, in 2004, when I started writing music for TV shows and I got like a Discovery Channel gig, this was right after I was working for other composers and saw a bunch of people burn through a ton of cash and weren't particularly financially savvy. And I had a mission in 2004, about 20 years ago, to become a very financially savvy composer and get rid of the garbage about being a quote unquote struggling artist or an authentic or not composer because I had some idea about what money was about. And I now I'm at the point where actually I think that I've got a pretty good grasp on a lot of things and can help a lot of people navigate through some of these things. And I've had my ups and downs with it. I'm actually a person that wears my financial life on my sleeve to a certain degree. I was buried in student loans. I've been through credit card debt. I've also then I've been down a couple $100,000 and I've been up over seven figures. So I've had this range of experience but most of my life as a composer, especially in years that are up and down, have been um, really mitigated by the fact that I've had a very, very good sense about how my financial life works. And so my best years are amazing, but not only a little bit better than my worst years, and vice versa. So I live kind of in this moderate place, and actually I believe in people planning for retirement for as composing. I believe in long-term investing. I believe in you know uh, lots of the tools that everybody else has as a gig worker or a freelancer apply to us as well. Just because we're composers doesn't mean that we don't have a grasp on these tools and make it worthwhile for ourselves, too. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion. So I just volunteered because I was like, that's me. That's me talking to basically friends. I might as well share this stuff and be an open book to other people that can help them really, you know.
Well, thank you both for your service. Honestly, it really means a lot. Sort of our goal with these inside sessions is to draw back the curtain on stuff that like maybe we didn't learn it in school, maybe we didn't go to school, maybe we're new, maybe we're not from the US, or there's like all these things at play. We all have different backgrounds, and money is awkward to talk about, but I do think it's something we should talk about because many of us on this call I know live in LA, and it's like the most expensive place to try to get your foot in the door, and all things considered, it is very hard. So hopefully we can crack the code on some of this today. So I have a lot of questions here. We'll see if we get through them all. If we don't, all good. And of course, people watching, if you have questions, like I said, drop it in the chat. If you want to drop where you're calling in from in the chat so we can say, hey, you can do that too. So let's start with my first question. I'm just going to go in order of, it might not be the best order, but let's start with budgeting. Extremely important for freelancers. What are some tips for budgeting for a new project, not only financially, but including other resources such as time? Budget can also be tricky for freelancers as we're not on a fixed income. It changes typically each month depending on the project, side gigs, and royalties. So if one of you wants to jump in with that one, let's start with that.
Oh,
Do you want to go first,
yeah, go
Jen?
ahead. Go ahead. You can go.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, in general, the first number that you get, like, I think it's really important that you just immediately are thinking about the budget, and not because I think it's really easy for us to like somebody says, hey, like I'm gonna give you $15,000 for this, to be like, oh my God. Like, as freelancers, we hear that and we like froth at the mouth because we're just so excited to be making money. But the reality of like immediately considering your taxes and taking things off of the top. But if you're going into a specific project, like the first thing you need to be parsing out is like, what do I need to take away from this that's going into my pocket so that I can pay my bills? And then is there something left for elements so if these people want any live elements and I'm going to start paying people, you need to start really like compartmentalizing that budget right away. Because I think there's just too often that we're like seeing a figure and excited about that figure without having like real conceptual, like how much this gets divvied up down the road. And I think it is okay. Like so many composers will end up giving their entire budget to the project without really walking away with any in their pocket. And that is like really should be a strategy based off the project. So if it's something that like you honestly don't think, you need to be weighing the consequences of that, because if it's something that could go somewhere and really advance your career, then like maybe there is a sacrifice to be made there in your budget and you can consider depending on what else you also have going on and the time you have. But if you don't, then like that's the thing for composers, is like being able to protect your own personal finances to get through a project versus like giving it all to everything, no matter where this thing is going to go. Like I've been on projects where like they're hopeful to maybe do a festival and it's a short film, and that it's like there's no room to divvy up this money to anything besides my own time and effort. And, you know, if things get drug out for a long time, then that's more and more time you don't have to invest in other work. And so you really have to be protective of what you want to take home from that project and how much you're expending of yourself and your time that's like not coming back to you in any way financially.
Yeah, I think it's a case by case basis. I mean, I think I mean I agree with all that. Uh, um, you definitely negotiate to a point where you actually are looking at what you're going to end up in the end. I mean, like this is like it is a common error actually, and I have friends right now working on projects where they've burned through 5 months of their time and they've burned the entire budget on the film, and you're like, well, how am I going to live on this? It can be strategic if it's like there's a giant actor on this, there's a future for it. If it's a TV project that's going to go into multiple seasons, you might burn through a lot of your resources to do that, and that might be worth some of your time. I mean, I think that you also, if it's a corporate gig, like a non independent film type of deal, I mean, I think you almost have to be protective of a certain percentage of you'll hear me talk about, I think of things in percentages all the time. Basically, if you could squirrel away 10% of your project or something like that, or 20% of your project, and just say, that's the money I'm getting. If I'm getting 50,000, this is round numbers, if I'm getting $50,000 of this, no matter what, $10,000 of that's mine, kind of think about ways of taking something off the top and then kind of not seeing it. That's a way to do it. But on projects though, it's also it's useful to think of things in kind of time chunks. Like think about things almost like a quarterly basis. This is very business minded to think of things on a quarterly basis. Like a TV show might be an annual thing, but like a film might be like, what am I going to do this quarter? And if it turns into something like, oh God, this is going to turn into 5 months of my time, and it costs me $6,000 a month to live in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
that's my cash outlay. Like you can't do it for $20,000.
Yeah.
You can't, so those, and of course this is the rub, right? Because then the expectations are super high and the money is low, but you do have to think about these things because you don't want to be on a 5 month project. And regardless if you're like, wow, I'm really excited, I finally have a gig, but you're just in a deficit situation essentially.
Yeah.
So it's important to think about these things before just jumping and being like, oh, I see the number. And like Hope said too, I mean, like I would also say negotiate hard on these things. I was just telling an anecdote before we got on here. Basically, like, I had a documentary for Paramount Plus I did last year, and they threw out a number and was like half as much what they end up paying, basically. And all I had to do was basically tell them like in a day, like I couldn't do it for that amount. And sometimes we're reticent to ask for that, but especially on the corporate side of things, they're just looking at a line. There's it's the line producer looking at a line item. Like it's not as personal as what everybody thinks it is.
Yeah.
And when that happened, when you start realizing like it's not as personal, you have a little bit more leverage on these situations. But I would say as far as budgeting time and money and these things, like if it's a real budget, try to slice some of the money off and say that's my money, and then go from there rather than be like, well, I'm going to record all my strings at East West and I'm going to hire, 10 people and, hire an orchestrator, blah, blah, blah. And then you burn through your money. And then at the end of the day, you might have nice credit, but you don't, it can be strategic, the credit, of course, but you don't want to just constantly burn through your money like that. It's no different than any other business in that way.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like you take the percentage off the top that you would want for yourself, and then don't divide it by hours because that just
Yeah,
doesn't
that
work in our
doesn't.
industry. But by month, like if you look at if let's say you're taking $10,000 off the top and it's going to take 3 months to do this project, like you need to divide that number by three and consider what else you have going on and being like, can I live off of this? And that's like the important thing because it would be easy then to still look at the 10,000 as like, well, that's a nice amount of money to make in a month. But again, like you really need to think of it in terms of how long the project is going to be going on for and what else you can be working on at the same time. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to share on a personal budget like thing just in general, if you're not budgeting and like going through your finances and making a list of all of your expenses, That's so important. I'm always amazed at how many people like don't have that system in place for themselves. You should never be surprised about the amount of money, hopefully, that's in your bank account. Like that should be something that you're aware of because you know everything that you're spending. And like I use this resource called Monarch to do my budget, and that's like it categorizes my spending. And so I used to, when I was like younger and trying to get out of debt and everything, I would check it like every couple days because we didn't make a lot of money and I wanted to track our spending. But now, I check in on it once a month and look at where everything's at, and it shows me how much I have left in my grocery budget, how much left I have in my every kind of budget that you can imagine. And as a freelancer that has an unpredictable amount of money, my husband has an unpredictable amount of money every month, something constant like that in a budgeting sense is really helpful. And then when you look at your business finances, you're able to kind of separate the two. So I think that's a great resource that I really enjoy using, that makes it like really easy to budget.
Yeah, I like to add on to if I can add on to budgeting. Yeah, I mean, really, people don't. It's almost shocking to the level of that people don't know these numbers, but you really should know off the top of your head your net worth or how much you owe, your income, and your cash burn. Cash burn is basically, and I think that's a monthly figure. Net worth is basically everything you own minus what you owe. And you should know kind of roughly what your projected income is for like a year. Or I mean, I keep a pretty simple spreadsheet of net worth. I keep a spreadsheet of my income. I know what my 5-year income is. I know what my 10-year income is. I know what the breakdown of these things are, and then also I know my cash burn because we'll get into this in investing, but my definition of wealth is passive income minus cash burn.
Mhm.
So the more passive income I have, like royalties and investments and things like that, versus how much I'm spending on a monthly basis, that's what wealth looks like for me. So
Mhm.
knowing these things, but budget's super important. I will say I have a little bit of a counter narrative about that personally, which is basically it's easier to expand my income than it is to cut everything down to the bone.
Mhm.
That like the latte factor, if you hear financial gurus talk about that stuff, for me is complete garbage because basically you can't sit in a hole and do nothing, especially in the city of Los Angeles. You have to do things,
Yeah.
and you have to do things to get work too. So it's inconceivable that I'll just say like, well, there's my budget for X, Y, and Z, and I'm never going to go out to dinner because, well, you may be sitting across from a showrunner or a producer or somebody that's going to give you your next project. And that's just, you have to get out there. So
Totally.
budgets are great to a point, is my
Yeah.
my take.
If you're somebody who's never tracked your budget before, like I suggest you do it just so you learn your
Yeah.
own habits and patterns. But of course, like as freelancers, I'm adjusting every
Yeah.
month on what's going on and what's happening. And like I said, I have a kid, things happen all the time that I have to adjust, but like being able to see it visually is super that for me is like very helpful, but like 100%
Great.
agree. Things come up all the time. You can't like live and die by it, but if you've never tracked your spending in any way, you'd be shocked. And there are definitely ways if you're in a like there are definitely ways to cut costs if you've never looked at it and you've never faced it. But that doesn't mean that like yeah, if you don't get a latte, you'll buy a house next year in LA.
Yeah.
Whatever the millennial like make
Yeah.
fun of
Yeah,
millennials,
that and
whatever.
avocado toast.
Exactly,
They're
right.
like the
Yeah.
Yeah,
dang
yeah.
millennials and their avocado toast.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what's screwing them. I'm like, yeah, that's what's screwing us.
Yeah.
So
It, it's
silly.
really it's really insulting in young people,
Totally.
those comments, because you're like, baby boomers have I hate to bag on baby boomers, but baby boomers have most of the wealth,
Yeah.
and then they're complaining about people buying things that are minuscule to them,
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is
100%.
really lame.
Totally.
super lame. Probably a lot of us have parents in that generation. We told them we wanted to be artists. They told us it was dumb. Relatable, for me at least. Although actually my parents
Yeah,
agree.
yeah.
I'm kidding. They were surprised when I said I wanted to be an artist, but not that surprised. Uh, and it's been a learning process, which Maybe it continues to be always, but that was a great starter with budgeting because I think that's a huge thing. Let's see. Let's do let's do saving next because some of these do kind of play into each other, and we will get into taxes and stuff like that. That's really the only one I actually do have some thoughts on myself. The rest of this is on y'all. Thank you. But for saving, what are some ways to start saving money as a freelance artist? Many projects are package deals, but some might include some clause about royalties, like extra royalties. I don't know. For me, it's always a package deal. But do you recommend putting aside some of each package deal you might be working on, each project you work on?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of mentioned that in the first topic, budgeting, but I would say like saving as a goal, I think it's great to like say, I mean, you could do this on a quarterly basis. Like since freelance life is up and down, this is how I do it actually these days. It's basically like I look at my quarter and how much I made in my quarter, and I save a percentage of that. And that allows me to have variable income with variable savings, right? And then at the end of the year, if I happen to have extra money laying around, then I'll max out my 401k. We'll get into that, but I'll do all the max stuff that's tax deferred. But really, it's about having. I'd say you could start small, especially when you're young. Starting small and putting a small amount of money aside, if it's 5% or 10% of everything, equals a great life when you're my age, basically. So it's really, really important. I can't emphasize that part enough because I have a lot of friends of my age that didn't get that in their heads early on, and they missed out on the last 15 years of investing, basically, and 15 years of saving, and that's really the way to have some leverage over this career is that. So I'd recommend like saving a percentage if you can. I mean, it doesn't have to be a lot either because time factor of money is the largest component of getting wealthy. Time. The reason why people like have like Warren Buffett in 95 and they've got all kinds of money is because they've been investing for 60 years. It's not because they were like necessarily much smarter than anybody else, but it's just time. And if I could go back and punch myself in the face when I was 35, I would say, "Oh my God, put all the rest of that money away. Like, forget about it.
Yes.
Put it all away." Like, that's what I would do. Any
Yeah.
regrets of being when you're 35? Yeah, I didn't put enough money in the S&P 500. I don't know. So save a little, save even if it's a small percentage, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, my husband and I, again, like both freelancers, so we sit down at the beginning of every year and sort of make a financial goal list. And of course, like the first thing that we always like have at the top of our list is to max out our Roth IRAs. Between the two of us, that's $14,000. And so that's already as freelancers, like a job, right? And then we have a kid, so there's a 529 college savings account that we are contributing to. And then there's our personal savings, which we put into a high yield savings account. And so there's kind of like bullet points right away of like, how much can we do? And over the years, we came here very broke, like just surviving off of coffee shop and retail jobs and paying off student debt and stuff. But the continual focus on those basic goals before we expand outside of those things and has been, really incredibly beneficial, like being able to invest. Like there's so many numbers and statistics out there about like if you start putting money towards your retirement in your 20s, like the exponential amount of money you're going to have in comparison to starting even just in your 30s is very significant. And so, like anybody in the financial world will say, like, even if it's $50 a month to start it, like just start. Because I think there's so many of us that like are always waiting for like when I get to here, then I can do it. And we do have to consider these things like the fluctuation is really hard to like consistently withdraw money every month. But when you, again, like in a budget, in a situation, in a gig, like you're talking about, Connor, like if you are not regularly contributing to anything, then yes, when you get a project, like then let's talk 10% needs to go to your monthly bills or whatever, and then shave off a percentage for putting towards that savings. And it's like I think the reason people get really discouraged by this is because $20,000 that seems kind of exciting to us in one moment feels so small so quickly. Um, but that is the rat race of being a composer. And it's so much better to embrace these things because, like Jonathan said, like the benefits long term, like you got to think long game in this world. And the benefits long term are like so much better. Like I was saying before the call, like, I have a studio now. Like most people in my position probably wouldn't have that, but I worked really hard to protect my income and look at things from a yearly and annual perspective and being able to see the patterns of my finances and saving for these things and get here. And it's been truly through the path of like disciplined um, percentages of projects and all of that that's led to having a savings account and having those things. And so I think just the encouragement of like, it's so okay to start small, like that is, it just compounds and time is like your ultimate friend in that way. Um, and it's so much nicer to get paid and not feel desperate versus like when you get money and then you're just like clamoring. If you have savings, this opportunity to feel less and less like it's your like getting a job is like your survival versus like, well, I know I have some reinforcements behind me. And I had sat down, my husband and I sat down, once we were debt free, we like sat down with a financial person and they were like, both being artists, you need to attempt to have 6 months worth of emergency funding in your savings account because, of course, the first thing to go when the economies crash and things like that are often creative work. And so the more that you can be prepared for those times, the less you have to panic when those times come. And as we all know, in the last couple of years, like they do come. You stick around long enough, they'll come again. Um, and so being prepared for those times like really takes the weight of like having to pivot to a different industry and things like that. Like trying to relieve yourself of some of that weight, I think like really helps our mental health because it's very hard to be creatively inspired when you're like so stressed about your finances. Um, so anyway,
Yeah, I would like to, I mean, add on to that, which is actually the things that allow myself and it sounds like you set up this system, Hope, too, is allows you to have some leverage over the situation. And it's like when every gig that comes along isn't sort of do or die, it
yeah,
changes your mindset. It
yeah,
changes your stress level. And I've Nyla, you were in my class at Columbia. You probably heard me say this. Um, um, my favorite piece of advice is to say it, and I said, what's your best piece of advice for a composing career in LA? And it's a cash buffer. It's having a cash buffer. And various, I mean, if you any financial advice person is going to say 3 or 4 months, but in freelance careers, I think it's more like 6, 12, 18 months. And personally, I'm usually around 18 months of cash savings. So that's ridiculous. But that's the way I've seen over 20 years how I can have a 6 month period like burn through a lot of cash and not have as much work as I want.
yeah,
Um, and I feel comfortable doing that. But the way I structure things, though, I mean, it's kind of similar actually. Um, I I have I think I've stripped this down to more like a year buffer, but I have a year of living expenses. Like that took me a long time to build that after being in debt and being in student loans. Like it took me a long time to get there. So I go, you take away high interest debt, you take away low interest debt. At the same time, though, I really want to build a 3, 6, 12-month buffer, whatever you're comfortable or can do. And then after that, for years, actually, I'm a little bit different place now because I want to enjoy my life more. But for years, I maxed out all the tax deferred savings. So as a freelancer, you could set up solo 401k. That's 20 right now. It's 20. You can put away $23,000 a year tax free. That cuts your taxes down. If you're over the age of 50, you could also put $7,500 additional in. Additionally, you could do an employer match, which you are the employer. You could do 25% of whatever your income on top of that. It's like, look, as small business people, we sometimes don't quite grasp as composers that we have huge advantages over the person who makes a wage to tax defer money and put in investments. When I realized that in 2007, I was like, and I had some years where I did 3 or 4 TV shows at once, and I maxed out everything every year. Was like the best thing I possibly did for myself in the long term. And so the way this stuff is structured, though, it's pretty simple it looks simple to me, basically, which is basically I've got a cash buffer that's in a high yield savings account that gets like, four, like now it's like 4.25, gets four and a
Mhm.
quarter percent. Anything debt wise that's over 4.25%, I pay because it's a better investment than my 4.25%. And then all the investments are tax deferred. You cut your tax bill down. And then on top of that, like if there's numbers you should have in your head, which is basically every dollar you save, if you get 10% interest on that, it doubles in 7.2 years. There's a number, power of 72, basically. If you divide the interest rate you're getting by 72, you get how many years it takes for that money to double. So it works the other way too. If you have credit cards that are 20% interest, that balance is going to double in 3 or 4 years. But an investment like the stock market this year is 20% or more. It's like 27%. Basically, my money would double in 3 or 4 years at this rate. So every dollar that I don't save and put into that is money lost to me, kind of.
Mhm.
So past the point of cash buffers and things like that, but a cash buffer is really important, like above everything to me. And
Totally.
and 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 I've had that cash buffer for 20 years. So there hasn't even on the times where I've been like on top of the world and had like mid six-figure incomes from TV composing, like the buffer has stayed the same and I just saved more money then.
Mhm. It's great.
Fortunate position, luck, privilege, a lot of things, hard work, etc. But these things are important to do, and it doesn't take. You have to start with that, basically. I think you have to start with cash buffer.
Definitely. And I
The
think, Jonathan, to
emergency
your,
fund.
oh, sorry, go ahead,
Sorry,
Connor.
I
What'd
just
you
want to
say?
be clear for people who maybe don't know as many financial terms.
Yeah,
Cash buffer is like emergency savings that you have.
Yeah.
emergency savings. I call it cash. I don't know why I call it cash
Yeah.
No,
buffer,
that's
but
cool.
yeah.
I just wanted to clear it up because I don't know that much financial stuff. So maybe other people
Well,
do.
emergency savings, and also there's an easy way to calculate this, what that goal is. You figure out what your monthly expenses is, pad it a little bit, maybe by 10 or 15%. So if your cash burn in LA is, if say you've got $5,000 of expenses and you want to save 3 or 6 months living expenses, that'd be 15 to $30,000, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So, and you just kind of you do it that way, and that way, if you do have a couple of dry months or you do have some unexpected expenses, you don't have to like burn your house down, so to speak, to and stress out too, you know.
Yeah. Well, and if you're putting it in a high yield savings, I mean, like obviously when it starts small, it's not that significant, but as your savings grows, like the fact that like every month I'm just gaining hundreds of dollars because of, and like if you have a lot of money in your high yield savings, then like, I mean, I know somebody who sold a house and just put the entire amount of money in a high yield savings and is now paying his rent while his new house is being built through just the dividends, like the
Interest, yeah.
return, yeah, the interest on his high yield. So like the nice thing is if you are that disciplined, you'll start to see your money start working for you at a certain point, and that is really incredible and really worth it because you start to feel like once you get your royalties start paying your dividend, your interest rates start paying, you're not paying out interest on credit cards every month, but you're gaining interest all the time. Like you'll start to see that like, oh, there's ways I can have my money work for me that involve no creative work like today, and that's really advantageous for all of us who sometimes don't have any creative work to be working on, to know that like your money is working for you in the meantime is really powerful. And just like with Jonathan's point about all of it, like start at a small, like even if you're just $40,000 a year, like start there. It like whether or not you're making the mid six figures or whether or not you're making $40,000 a year, like
Yeah.
treat it all the same. Like that is the best thing you could do for yourself is like not thinking, oh, well, if I was making mid six figures, of course I would save that much money. That's like the mentality should be like whether wherever you're at in it to start at that spot and not to like wait until because I think
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it doesn't ever get easier to save money. Usually if you're making more money, you're spending more money anyway. And so like always considering wherever you're at as the place to be doing it.
Yeah, yeah. I would actually add on one thing about that, which I come across a lot, which is the magical thinking that if only I get that gig, this is what happens in composer land here. If only I got that gig and I'll get that money, then my money problems will be solved. And actually, that is not the way it works.
Right.
You end up spending more money, and bad financial habits follow you no matter what income you're at. Bad financial habits follow you. So if you're not a saver and suddenly you come into a Netflix gig and suddenly you're like, wow, finally I made a couple $100,000 on something, yes, that helps a lot. However, I would most of the time what happens is people overspend on the other side of that and then don't plan for the stuff that happens right after that, which is like, nothing's a straight arrow up.
Yeah.
And then people then, oh, I have enough money to buy a house, and they buy too expensive a house, and then suddenly they don't have any more financial security than they really did before. They just have higher expenses,
That
and
Totally.
they
makes
have a little bit more money. I mean, I'm also describing what happened to me a little bit too, because I did that, and and it kind of turned into well. Thankfully, I was a saver, and I had that habit in place even right after I got out of debt. But I still drastically overspent on everything. And you think that it's never going to end too, and then you go, oh, in fact, wow, well, the budgets are half as much as they used to be as 10 years ago. And you thought, oh, I'm going to have episodic television shows forever. And you're like, well, it's cyclical and everyone's career is cyclical. So you better have like, it's great to have these things in place and then do them as percentages so that when life is better financially, you can enjoy it, but you're still doing the savvy things that you've put in place, you
Yeah.
know. So the magical thinking around it's the thing I mean, I have, will remain nameless, many friends who are basically like, when I get that bigger gig, then I'll do these things, and life trickles on, and then suddenly you're even if you got that thing, then you're like, well, you may have buried yourself in debt, or maybe you're finally like, oh, finally you exhale, you got like, oh, I could live in a better place or something like that. And then money is just you have to have the language of it to really make sure that it lasts longer too. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's really useful. And also, we have an audience question. Hope already chimed in on this, but Jonathan, do you have any thoughts on what are some good high yield savings accounts? Thank you for the question, Rachel.
There's many. I mean, you could find, right around these days are paying around 4.25%. You could just do an online search. You could look at Bankrate or NerdWallet, and they'll have a good rundown of those things. A lot of like if you have like a Fidelity or a Schwab account, like those have also high yield interest rates that are pretty decent these days. Like I have Schwab, and I think it's like 4.25 now. It was 5 just a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine too.
Yeah, yeah. Take a look at, but if you want to look at the latest ones, depending on your situation, I look at like bankrate.com or nerdwallet.com. Those would have high yield savings rates on there. But the current rate's about 4.25. That's what you're looking for.
Great. Okay, so let's keep going. The next one, pretty related as well. Let's talk about taxes. I'm going to put out there, I myself use a tax accountant because doing taxes sucks and I hate it. And I do mine every month, which was a tip my good friend from undergrad and Columbia College Chicago, Brittany Dutton, told me, which is like once a month, sit down, drink your coffee, do your expenditures for each month so you don't have to do it at the end of the year like I was doing. And it was awful and not fun. Now
Mm.
I do it this way. Every month, I put in my expenditures, I put in my money in, and I send it to my tax accountant. So in January, usually, I have everything from the prior year. He can then do it, and I pay him to do it, which is worth every penny. That's my take. What do y'all think about taxes? And then one more little point I wanted to say about this is for those of you living in LA, Alexa Borden actually alerted me to this one because I actually got served by this business tax thing in Los Angeles County.
Mm.
It's exclusive
Yeah.
to the city of Los Angeles. It's happened to a lot of other composers I know as well, big composers. So I'm going to link this to you. You should all sign up for this so you don't get served. It's really unfortunate when that happens, but we all need to have our composing business registered. They send you a little certificate and everything, but it costs nothing to submit your registration. But if you do not do it, you have the possibility of getting served for a very large fee. I think mine was like 5 grand or something. I was able to talk it down somewhat, but I still had to pay. I was like, this
Yeah,
sucks.
it's like 1.25% on everything up to 300,000 if you don't register. If you register, it's $0.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm putting that in the chat. It's really, I think I'm really grateful for the people who have told me about this stuff because I had no clue. And then I got that in the mail and was like, what's this? It was not good. So let's talk taxes for a bit. What do y'all think about taxes? Or pivot on to any tax related. But I know we all have to pay them. It's not fun.
Yeah.
It's very unfun.
Yeah, I mean, definitely like it's not that expensive to hire somebody in terms of doing that or yourself. Like, my husband between my husband and I, we get like 30 1099s like in our it's like January to March is just like insane amounts of mail with 1099. So like have hiring somebody, it's like it's really not that expensive. Like most of the time you probably pay $500 to have somebody do it for you. And like, we've done TurboTax a ton and it's also not cheap. So the different, and honestly, people say that like when you have somebody do it, like they're much more likely to be more lenient than you would if you're answering the questions by yourself. And I don't mean to say like dodgy, like find a good tax person, but just that they're like, you're usually I have this internal thing too where it's like if they ask me a question, I'm like, well, technically, like that square footage space was like a foot smaller and I don't want to get in trouble or whatever. Whereas like somebody else is like not, they know how the system works and they're not concerned with so many of those things. So you usually will benefit from having somebody else look at it. But yeah, if you're on like, a very simple system and you're not just completely freelance, then like doing them yourself and paying through TurboTax is like fine. But if you are getting all kinds of 1099s and it's confusing, yes, 100% you should be tracking. You can pay your taxes quarterly if you want to. I did that for years. This year I didn't just because I didn't need to. But in the past, I've paid them quarterly. And I use QuickBooks. It gives me an estimate for every quarterly taxes, and I go through the LA County to pay them. And that is nice, at least because for me, I like taking it out of my site. But like there's way more strategies to that. You could also put the money you would pay to taxes in a high yield savings, and then you're making interest on that money all year, and then you can pay it at the end of the year. But yes, ways to track it. Like for me, QuickBooks is super helpful because just like the system on Monarch, which I use for my personal budgeting, QuickBooks then is my business budgeting, and I can go through and line item all my stuff all year long. And then I can export that, all the what's like spreadsheets and everything like that. I can export my information and give it to my tax person. So that's a nice system, but in general, like make sure you're saving all the information and that you're keeping track of your things because there's nothing worse than trying to track down all of your shit by the end of the year. And if you're on top of it all year, then it's a pretty simple process, would be my taxes spiel.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I use QuickBooks as well, and I use an accountant too. And I've been using an accountant for probably 15 years or more. It gets too complicated. I mean, it gets to be like royalties, international royalties, 1099s. Sometimes if I teach W-2s,
Yeah.
then also sometimes employees, sometimes investment stuff where you start having how much can I defer tax wise, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those questions are harder to. There's some tax strategy that's involved in these things. I've been an S corporation since 2008, something like that. Depends on what entity tax entity you are going to be determines how much tax accounting you need to. If you're a sole prop and you have basically only one or two employers, you do it yourself. But if you have, I was always told if you had over a certain amount of money really that you're getting every year and you're freelance, there's a lot of benefits from having a tax accountant and having yourself set up as an LLC or as S corp. Um, like I do the thing, I would say the only tax trick I know is tax trick is that basically you could pay yourself a salary that's lower than the limit for Social Security and essentially not pay all the 15.3% Social Security tax and then save that difference. And so you save money on taxes. It's more complicated tax wise, but I would say highly recommend having a tax accountant. It saves every penny, every penny I spend on that, I get money back basically, and it's not unscrupulous. It's like somebody that's got 30 years experience. Not always cheap too. It depends on what situation you're in, but when you start dealing with like real estate transactions and stuff like that, tax accountants have been like amazing because you could figure out how to shift the money around and figure out how to pay taxes in certain years and not and stuff like that. So it's worth it. But tracking it's really important. And actually, I have done quarterly payments too. It depends on what the income looks like for the year. Quarterly tax payments means no surprises in April and
Mhm.
no coming with five figures of something or being like, oh God, I forgot. Yeah, yeah, that's right, taxes. I have personal feelings about how the idea that you spend money so you don't pay taxes is kind of weird. Because basically, like, yes, you could at the end of the year you could spend all the rest of your money on equipment and write that off in your taxes, but basically you're spending $1 to save 25 cents.
Mhm.
It's not the right approach. And a lot of people get really hung up on that after they have some money, like, oh, if I buy this thing or I put all my money in X, Y, and Z, then I won't have to pay as much taxes. Well, you're still spending the money on the thing, basically.
Yeah, it's still not money in your pocket.
It's not money in your pocket. It's not tax dollars.
Yeah, I mean, like this year for me, like because of the money I made last year, I was like, I got the studio, and then because like of the nature of the industry this year, I made less money than I did last year. But because I got the studio, I'm also like really not paying any taxes this year.
Yeah.
So there are like benefits, but it depends on how much money you make, of course, like that really differentiates between how if it's actually beneficial or not. And like I sat down with the tax person at the end of last year to talk through like this decision because I was signing a year lease and like, looking at all the data and all of that is really important in your decision making. Having an accountant or a tax person who you can talk to about some of those decisions um is helpful
Yeah.
because sometimes it's hard to see the big picture.
It's
Um, yeah, and they can help you see the big picture.
Yeah, and I will say, like one of the reasons I'm so big on investing too is that it's not my. I mean, I'm a liberal guy, but it's not my decision to make these policies. But the things in America that are tax advantaged are small business and real estate and investing, basically. Those are the three things. Labor is not. You pay
Mhm.
all the taxes on the work you do. But investing, you could defer money, and it's tax advantage too. If you hold on the money long term, you pay 15% capital gains on it. You don't pay income tax on it. Real estate's tax advantage as well. If you sell a property, you're exempt on the first $500,000 in increases on it. So knowing these things, like you want to take advantage of these, that's the only way to take advantage of the tax system is just to know how it's basically advantages those things. Real estate, investing. Um, anyway, yeah, get a good accountant once you have those basically.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we only have 7 minutes left, but maybe we could talk a bit about investing since that was something that we hit on a little bit. I know there's different types of investing, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. I have a small portfolio with some of these things. I still, I don't know that I totally get it, but what are y'all's thoughts on it? I also put in this in the question. Is it worth taking a class or something about learning how to do investing? What do y'all think about that?
It's like Jonathan's probably going to be able to speak to this way more specifically. I've like kind of am like a baby investor in that like my focus has always been my Roth IRA like as my first investment. And that's been incredible and growing and really paying off. But I have some like you can kind of do some like if you don't know my I mean I invest my retirement savings is through Vanguard, and then there's all kinds of different ways you can invest through them beyond just like a Roth or through a personal 401k. But yeah, like even just I use this app Acorns, and like that's something where like it just takes, $100 a month or something, but you just forget about it, and it's growing, and usually they'll have like a date where like you have a goal of like, oh, I'm not going to touch this until I'm 45, and they'll kind of give you, oh, this investment should be around this amount of money. And just to talk like more broad strokes about it, in the current state of our like the stock market is more reliable even with its ups and downs than even like the purchase of a home. Not that real estate is not something you should get into, especially in LA. If you can get in, get in. But just like on a current in the current state of things and how things are going, like I think at least for my husband and I, we have a kid, it's like, oh, we would love to buy a home in LA. Like, yes, that is a dream. And it is a great investment, depending, of course, each scenario is different. But actually, like the stock market in general has like a higher rate of growth and dependability no matter where you are in the US. And so it's great to just get in. That is definitely even more important, I would say, than like getting a house right away, unless you actually do have the funds for it. That's a whole different thing. But this whole podcast on NPR that I listened to about it was like very illuminating of like the current state of things, because I think we all come from generations where our parents are like, buy a house. Why haven't you bought a house? Um, and it's very different if you're a young person right now trying to get into all of that. And the stock market is definitely a place that you should have your eyes set on, and it's a more realistic place to start than like being able to buy a house in your 20s like our parents' generation all could. So that's my spiel on it, but Jonathan has, I'm sure, much more specific thoughts on it.
No, no, actually, it's funny about housing. I've I've actually owned a house in LA, and I've actually not owned a house in LA. And um, I think it depends on your situation and what you value. Like I did not find owning a house in LA to be that end all be all. And actually, right now I rent because it's a much better investment for my money. It's much cheaper to rent than it is to buy right now. And actually, the stock market has given me, um, especially in the last 3 years, like ridiculous returns. And it's killed real estate. And also, I'm not a person that likes being at Home Depot every weekend. So, and I value my freedom. My whole entire the basis of saving money is based on freedom, freedom of travel, freedom of thought, freedom, creative freedom, and that's my goal. And my goal is not to basically, and that's nothing against anybody having that as a goal. It's fine. And maybe I'll buy another house sometime in LA. I don't know. I don't know. But as far as investing is concerned, um, uh, there's uh, lots of literature on this, of course. There's lots of ways to learn about investing. I have a pretty um, straightforward system. I would say I'm a sophisticated investor, except for I know that I'm not as smart as everybody else is necessarily. And that's like the best thing to keep in mind about investing. As long as you get it mostly right, you're gonna do really, really well. And stocks is a long-term investment. I mean, you can't look at day-to-day fluctuations. There's a lot of stuff like that. You can if you're really active with it, but I recommend against it unless you have a lot of experience. Um, um, I mean, I'm in broad-based index funds mostly. I'm like, I also subscribe to the 80/20 rule with just about everything in my life. So I'm like, well, I will earmark 20% of my investments to be things that are maybe more individual. Like I have Nvidia stock that I bought at $40 a share. For example, I have some individual stocks, but most of it's just in broad-based U.S. index funds and some diversified portfolio that includes internationals and some bonds and stuff too. And it's not as complicated as what everyone makes it seem. It's a lot about how much money can you put in an annual basis. It's about doing that on a regular basis, and especially if you have youth on your side, it's not obsessing over that and not looking at it, and then opening up your account when you're 20 years later and being like, "Oh my God, I can't believe how much money I have." That's kind of what it looks like. Because long term, I mean, I've done 13 or 14% annually over the last 5 years. But long term, the stock market's like 12% annual on an annual basis. And that looks like, and of course, there's a curve to this. As you get more money, those investments grow more and more and more and more. And if you look at curves of this, you just go, oh my God, especially if you start when you're younger, the curve looks ridiculous because the interest rates are not, well, right now, cash is getting 4%, so that's okay, but nothing like 12% in stocks. But there's simple ways to get into this, and actually, I would recommend, like Hope said, I would recommend something like Vanguard. Just buy VTI or VOO. You could write those down. Those are just broad-based index funds that basically invest in. You could basically partake in the spoils of especially the technology industry right now, and those are roughly diversified across the top 500 companies in the country. And whether what your mix of like when it gets a little bit more complicated is what your mix of assets looks like in your portfolio, and that's roughly what portfolio theory or portfolio construction looks like, and that depends on risk tolerance, and that depends on age and what your goals
Yep.
are and things like that. I have a relatively high risk tolerance, so I have a lot of stock for my age. But I also, once you get to a certain point and you're like, wow, I've got my retirement's covered, like why would I not risk some of that to get even more? So
Yeah.
it's it's not as complicated as it seems, but I could recommend a couple books to start. And actually, if your question is also take a class, why not? If it was a class on personal finance, like say taught by a certified financial planner, great. But I would recommend some like three books really changed my life. One I read in the late 90s that'll date me. It's called Your Money or Your Life. And that was basically a book about time value of money. So basically, like if you put in X amount of time on something, you get X amount of dollars out, and everything that you buy then has a time value stamped onto it. And that's roughly the beginning of the FIRE movement, which is the Financial Independent Retire Early movement. That was their Bible at the beginning. That book, a contemporary book I recommend for beginning personal finance would be Ramit Sethi's book. You might have seen this Netflix show, Ramit Sethi, and that's called, what the hell is this book called? Um, I will teach you to be rich.
Mm.
Is a great book actually for beginning, like just like cash buffer. It's like it almost mirrors exactly what I did. Cash buffer, investment strategy, how to think about credit cards. We didn't talk about how to think about credit scores and stuff like that and banks, but that's in there. And then the other book that there's a couple other books I'd recommend too. Quit Like a Millionaire, which is actually about the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, but there's various degrees of that. That's about saving money aggressively and then having a portfolio pay for your life, which is basically what the goal is. And then also, I'd recommend Die with Zero, which is a counterfactual book about retirement ideas, and it's about living your life in time buckets and it's about not over saving, which is interesting
Hmm.
too.
You have to take some risk to get some reward.
Yes, you have to take a risk to take some reward. I think the thing that people do with investing is like, oh, I put I've got $3,000 in this thing I just started, and of course then the market goes down by 10%. Oh, I've only got $2,700. No, you only have $2,700 just this moment.
Yeah.
Like it's not you don't want to look on a daily basis,
Yeah.
or even quite frankly, you could look at it on a quarterly basis, probably a better way to look at it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to cut it short, but it is 11:03. Thank you both so much for being here, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm thinking maybe we'll try to do this again next year if y'all are up for it, because we still had like more than half the questions to get to. So I'll
Yeah, we
save
did.
those for next time. I'm not getting rid of them. But honestly, this was really, really helpful. Thank you for your transparency. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for your time. Especially after this, we know time is worth money. So thank you.
Well, I threw my email in the chat and like, yeah, if you ever want to talk more about it too, like open door, happy to. Obviously, like disclaimer to like Jonathan and I, both of us are not, we are not
Thank you.
accountants, we're not professional
Thanks for saying
financial
that. I was going to say
advisors.
that too.
I think that's important, but if you do want to chat more and just bounce more ideas off or like getting started, like please, my door is definitely open and happy to share anything else I've learned along the way.
Same with me. I just put my email in there. So if anybody has any questions, I'm not a certified financial planner. Somebody told me recently I should do that, but I love composing too much. So
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. This was awesome. This will be up on YouTube. I hope you all have wonderful holidays for those who celebrate, and Happy New Year and everything. And well done making it through 2024, everybody. Yes,
We did it.
you did it. Well done. Thank you all, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.